Serious, what was your scariest weather-related experience? I was living by myself when Hurricane Charlie went through Florida. I was huddled in my house with a candle, power had gone out, just listening to a hellish maelstrom shake my old wood house. At one point I got up and peeked out the window. There was strange green flashes going off all over. I realized they were power transformers exploding. Microburst winds and a thunderstorm. I knew the storm was coming, so I ran to my neighbor's house to make sure her dog was away. He was. As I turned to run back, the wind came out of nowhere, and in the few hundred feet I ran home. 6 or 7 trees and large branches came down all around me in a matter of seconds. One huge branch missed me by about 10 feet. The sound of the rush of wind, then cracking and crashing of trees is something I'll never forget. Microbursts are not to be fricked with. I'm studying to be a pilot and they scare the crap out of me. While driving to California from Mississippi, we got caught in a huge desert storm somewhere in Arizona, or possibly New Mexico. There was a lot of rain and wind, but it started off normally enough. After about 5 minutes though, it started getting crazy. The dirt and sand was so dry that all of the water coming down was kicking it up more than soaking it, so after a few minutes both sides of the road were completely hidden by dust going up about 30 feet, and then above that was just rain, with the freeway cutting through it. It looked like Moses parting the sea, except it was a freeway parting a giant dust cloud. So that was kind of neat. But then it got intense. Every time lightning flashed, you could see into the dust clouds, and there were multiple tornadoes, dust devils on each side of us. Deciding to take shelter, we pulled into a motel that was ahead of us and ran into the lobby along with about 4 other people who had come off the road. Just as we were getting into the lobby, the storm really took off and we started getting hail too. One guy slipped in the parking lot and started bleeding everywhere, and me and my husband had to dash outside to literally drag him into the building. Then us, the guy, the others from the road, and about 6 people from the hotel including the staff just huddled in the lobby watching the security camera feed from outside on their desk computer. One by one, the cameras were getting taken out by hail or wind until eventually it was all just static and howling wind and dust outside the windows. Was like something from a disaster movie. I'll never forget it. You were in a haboob. For something so scary it sure has a silly name. When I was 11 one summer, it was just my 2 sisters and me home when a tornado came. We lived in the country, so no alarms to hear. It was a thunderstorm that just kept getting worse and darker. We knew we had problems when in the middle of the worst part of the storm, all the wind died, like someone literally flipped a switch. I looked to the highest point of some trees and could see the highest leaf sitting still. A few moments later we could start to hear the distant sound of what sounded like a train, but no railroad tracks anywhere near. That is the sign of a tornado. We hauled butt into the basement, freaking out. We could see the tornado come across some farm fields, into our next door neighbor's backyard where it picked up a barrel, and as it came toward our place, it hopped our house, tore the antenna off, but no other damage. I can't even imagine. I've never witnessed or lived through a tornado, but they scare the ever-loving crap out of me. There was a huge storm that my dad and I were watching while standing in the garage with the garage door open. Finally, the storm got so intense that the power went out while the garage door was still open. My dad, whose jokes are sometimes in poor taste, just put his hand over his mouth and said, "Oh crap." Me, as a 10-year-old, said, "What? What?" My dad said the power went out and the garage is still open. He sounded worried, so I frantically asked why that mattered. He simply said, "Well, it creates a negative pressure causing the house to explode." I started crying and ran to find my mom. He thought it was hilarious. When I was in K8, somebody somewhere in the school hierarchy heard that leaving a building's doors open during a tornado would protect it from a negative pressure explosion. I remember the principal going through the school during a tornado warning, grumbling about some people believing anything they hear while shutting all the doors that had been propped open. Walking home from a friend's house and nearly got hit by lightning. The bolt was really thick, bright, and loud, and I could taste the burning air. I'd say it struck about 400 feet behind my house. Had a lightning strike my neighbor's house during monsoon thunderstorms in 2011. Their maid was outside getting clothes from the clothesline and was struck. She survived, but the silver chain she was wearing melted and stuck to her neck, causing burns. When I was in kindergarten, my parents went to a work dinner, so my siblings and I were watching Nickelodeon. The TV signal went out, so we went to another TV to watch Monsters Inc. Then the power went out and an incredibly loud rain of hail pelted the house, and we all hid in the bathroom waiting for my parents. Another time, same age, tornado sirens started going off, so my family stayed in the bathroom for probably 7 hours through the night. Once we were okay to leave, we found that all the windows were broken. Yard was a disaster. Drove around town and every sign was on the ground. Neighbor's trampoline was on the roof. Crazy crap, but now tornado sirens go off and I am outside watching Midwest life. That's me. My phone goes off with a tornado warning and I go looking for it. Watching Hurricane Harvey roll in, knowing I was unable to evacuate and I might lose my home, not survive the night. The power went out at about 9:30 p.m. on the 25th of August, and the rest of the night was spent in total darkness. I was huddled in my room with a stray cat I had just rescued, listening to the sounds of the wind howling and power lines, large trees, rooftops being knocked to the ground. I live so close to the bayfront that I can jog there in less than 3 minutes. I was in middle school and had some sort of after-school event. It was late January and it had been lightly snowing all day and really cloudy. I called my mom with the phone at the school to let her know I was done. I was sitting outside leaning on a bike rack while waiting for her to show up. I then hear thunder crack. I had never even heard of thunder blizzards before, but I experienced one that day. In the course of maybe 5 minutes, a fog rolled in. The snow got super heavy, the wind began blowing hard, and lightning and thunder was going off every few seconds. I moved away from the bike racks and into a small alcove to get out of the cold wind. After maybe 30 seconds from leaving the bike rack, lightning struck the bike rack I had just been leaning against. That day was the most scared I've ever been from a storm. Growing up in the Midwest, thunderstorms and blizzards are common, so I wasn't afraid of them, but both at the same time, combined with lightning striking where I had just been, really got to me. I'm from rural North Dakota, and 10 years ago we had a blizzard that trapped my family and I into our home for 4 days. We had snow drifts 8 feet high, -30-degree weather, and we lived 15 miles from town. It's pretty typical for ND. It wasn't scary for me and my 3 siblings. We had a blast. My brother and I had a great time jumping off our roof into drifts and making tunnels through our yard. What makes this scary? My parents didn't tell us until we were adults, but there was only 2 days worth of food in the house. My parents didn't eat anything for 4 days to make sure my siblings and I were fed. We couldn't figure out why my mom cried when the roads finally opened up. Now I understand it was tears of relief. My parents are good people and they sacrificed for us. If you can, go hug your mom. Woke up one morning to my dog barking for breakfast. I hadn't slept well, so I was kinda in a daze and went out into our screen room and gave her a bowl of food. Took me a second to come online, but when I did I noticed it was dark as frick outside and there was loud whooshing noise all around me. It was like standing in a wind tunnel. I looked over at my dog and she was freaking out in the corner but refused to leave her food. Took me a second of yelling to convince her to abandon the kibble, but once things cleared up I turned on the news and realized a tornado had basically gone right over my house. Short version: I fed my dog outside in the middle of a small tornado. I know that this was a scary experience for you, and I'm glad you and your dog were safe, but that's probably one of the funniest things I've ever heard. Just the thought of you blearily feeding your dog while a tornado swarms around you and your dog caring more about food than something 100x scarier than a vacuum. This one morning I was preparing for middle school and it was 8:15. The sun would have been up, but instead there were these really dark clouds. I could hear thunder but the sound was muffled, probably from inside the clouds. I went to the bus a bit scared as the sky seemed to get worse and it started raining really hard, plus heavy. Apparently a tornado had formed near the area, which was enough to make a few kids in the bus start crying. While the bus was stopped to pick a kid up, lightning struck near a tree, missing. The sound that followed was loud enough and seeing it was really scary. We later had a tornado drill 30 minutes into first period, but the scare had wore off by then. When I was 11 I made my mom take me to get my first iPod during a pretty bad storm. On our way back, Lightning struck the field right next to us. The crack was deafening. My mom, and the cop in front of us, had to pull over for a minute. Whiteout snow while driving. Literally couldn't see anything past the front of the car. Had to pull over and wait for it to end. What makes it more horrifying are the dumb buses that drive like it's a clear blue sky. I don't care if you're in the middle of the floodplains, or in the middle of an urban area. Flash floods are freaking scary. Some communities never come back from a flood. Some people's entire lives are ruined and everything they own is washed away. Floods are freaking brutal. Top of Gludavark, a mountain in Snowdonia, midwinter whiteout storm. Walked onto an ice sheet and the gale started to push me sideways on the ice towards the cliff. In all, I guess I was pushed 10 yards by the intense wind. I fell flat on my face and crawled until I was in deep snow and could get some traction under my boots. I was training for a marathon and had an 8-mile run planned after work on the Seando Canal. I checked the weather after work and all looked well. I'm 3 miles out and the sky starts getting dark and I feel raindrops. A couple minutes later I'm stuck in the worst thunderstorm I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm alone on the canal and the only way to get back is to run 3 miles back the way I came. It's raining sideways so hard I cannot see 2 feet in front of me. The canal is flooded with water and I can barely run. Not to mention, I'm at a bend in the canal where it just drops off right to the Potomac River. It was utterly terrifying. So I'm walking as fast as I can while my glasses are covered in rain and I don't have a dry inch of clothing anywhere to wipe them off. I was so scared. Lightning and thunder is constant. Then I hear crack and a giant limb falls off a nearby tree crashing to the ground. I wanted to stop so bad and just hide, but I knew I needed to get back to my car. It rained the entire 3-mile run back to my car. I cried when I got back to my car. I was soaked, covered in mud, and shaking like a leaf. Only time it's ever happened to me. Adding to my list of reasons to not go running. Tornado season can get pretty scary if you don't have a plan or a place to go, or if you have a person who is panicking. A couple years ago, Oklahoma had a really bad tornado season. It was around the time of the 20th of May tornado, so everyone in my family is pretty good about handling tornadoes, except my dad. He goes into this panic rage mode where he just has to take control and he's freaking out and he's yelling and he's just generally running around like a chicken with its head cut off. There comes a time when he shouts, "Everyone get in the car. We are leaving." My mom tried to put up some fight but in the end we all piled into the car and took off down the road. Everything is all fine and dandy. We find a good place to sit and wait out the storm. Then he decides we have to move. He starts turning down all these different roads and we are listening to the radio and the radio is basically saying that if you are in a car you need to get out and find immediate shelter. Well, my dad says screw that. We keep driving. The rain starts to come down on the car harder and harder until we literally cannot see in front of us, so we have to pull over. The wind was so loud and it was rocking the car. I start hyperventilating and I'm pretty sure I blacked out for like a minute. Eventually we found our way back to our house as the storm died down. Turns out we were in between 2 storm cells. We have a shelter now. Dry lightning while climbing one of Colorado's 14ers. July 2015 on Mount Bishtart. About 500 featuring from vertical summit. Hiking party wasn't hit but lightning struck about 300 feet from us. Always get off the mountains before 12 p.m. kids. I'm glad you made it out unscathed. As a Canadian, I guess I can say the most dangerous weather experience we've had where I lived was a giant ice storm in 1998. Everything was frozen over. Power lines were cut and bent over. Cars were frozen over. Trees broke and fell into people's houses. People living in the outskirts of the city with farmland were almost completely isolated with barely any heat or communication. I was a kid, and I vividly remember my dad taking out a radio and trying to dial to a station for news and emergency reports in an era where lots of info just came from a TV or the newspaper. But of course, I'm Canadian. Terrible winters are a normal occurrence. So while that ice storm freaked up my home city for a while, most of the people were like, yeah, this is fine. You know what scares the crap out of everyone instead? The one time where we experienced a tiny earthquake for like 3 seconds. It destroyed nothing and yet everyone and their grandmother was like, Holy freaking crap, an earthquake, oh my god, including me. It was the scariest experience I've ever felt. Not the most dangerous, but definitely thought I was gonna die for no reason. Haha. Mayo, I just slept through a 7.9 not long ago. It was that tsunami warning that woke me up. In my 20s I used to build farm irrigation systems. Those great big ones with multiple humps you see in fields. We had one rule: if we heard thunder we were done. They are basically great big lightning rods. On one system we were on the second day of building the system, so there were already 3 spans up. We're working on the 4th span when it suddenly started getting bad real quick. There was a barn close by, so me, my co-worker, and my boss hightailed it over to it. Within minutes of getting to the barn the farmer showed up. He was paying us to build that system and he wants it done now. My boss grinned at him and told him we would if he'd stand there with at least one hand touching the irrigation system at all times. Farmer got even angrier and was cussing and screaming. The wind and rain were going crazy, constantly changing direction. Sounded like the barn roof could go any second. Then multiple bolts of lighting hit the system right in a row. It was super loud and we could see the lighting dancing along to where it connected to the well that gave the system its water. Farmer shut his mouth up real quick when that happened. Then just as quickly as the storm formed it was gone. Field was way too muddy for us to work in, so we had to let it dry out before we could move our crane back into it. Never did get any farmer to take us up on keeping their hand on the system. LOL. I posted this a few years ago when someone asked about the historic flooding in Charleston. Got me a gold unexpectedly. It still applies here. The last 2 nights have been living heck for me. Water was coming in through the floor everywhere in the house. I used literally all of my towels to clean it up, and even had to sacrifice one of my blankets. Sorry, Spider-Man. You took one for the team. The worst part wasn't the flooding though, because the city's water system was so backed up with water. Raw sewage came up through my toilet and bathtub. In less than 30 minutes, the bathtub was completely filled with disgusting brown water with God knows what floating in it. I was up all night, actually all night meaning from sunset until early dawn, scooping buckets of the stuff from the tub and dumping outside the bathroom window. When dawn rolled around, the rain stopped, and it took several hours for the sewage to go back down the drain, during which I took naps in 1-hour increments to wake up and check to see if it was rising or going down. I've won the battle for now, but I don't feel like I've really won. When raw sewage is involved, nobody wins, everyone loses. I was in Colombia as a student when the big flood happened. We didn't have classes for a week, no water for a few days, but luckily had power. The rivers were insanely high and I still remember my friend's house almost being underwater. Luckily they were on a hill. Just right down the street from his house, there was a 2-story house completely underwater. Anyone who's been in a hurricane will understand what I'm talking about. I used to ask my father what the scariest part of a hurricane was. He had semi-frequent hurricanes in his native country. He said the sound was undoubtedly the worst part of it. I thought it couldn't possibly be that bad. Then Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast. In the thick of it, I decided to open the door just so I could witness this allegedly frightening sound. I figured it would just sound like a particularly strong wind. He wasn't wrong. The sound is indescribable, and no recording device does it justice. It sounds like an endlessly evil, omnipotent chimera roaring a non-stop battle cry, and the breath of said battle cry had the strength to topple homes, and carry boats out of the ocean and nonchalantly throw them miles inland. It sounded like the most terrible of Lovecraftian horrors ever conceived. It's as though a beast only the divines could have the power to create had materialized to terrorize the world. To this day nothing matches the primal, instinctive fear I felt in that moment. And our area was hit pretty softly, all things considered. Some trees and boats got tossed around but no fatalities. No casualties at all if I recall correctly. I can't imagine what being in the areas that were flooded and leveled was like. Perhaps what made it more terrifying, and this applies to natural disasters as a whole, is knowing that there's no fighting back. Throughout history, man has conquered many adversaries. Wildlife, sickness, oceans, mountains, even one another. But despite our many achievements as a species, we are still unrelentingly at the mercy of Mother Nature. Our only option against a hurricane is to run and leave everything behind. and nothing serves as a more sobering reminder than to get caught right in the thick of it. In that moment, standing in the doorway of the front of my house, I suddenly understood why the ancients wrote of these incidents as though they were sentient, heavenly beings. You hear the sound and see the destruction firsthand, and you'll feel the same way. The sound and the difference in pressure that you feel, your whole body reacts to a hurricane. It's very disturbing because it happens before the storm actually starts, which makes it feel even more foreboding. Driving home from the in-laws, and the weather alert sound keeps coming on the radio, followed by a computer voice talking about potential tornadoes in the area. We think nothing of it since we're not in a tornado-prone area. Suddenly, and I mean suddenly, it starts pouring rain and the wind is driving the rain sideways. Can't see a thing, so we pull over till it passes. While we're sitting there, the wind picks up something fierce and the car starts shaking around on the side of the road. Frick, lasted all of about a minute, then it was all over. I'll never ignore those weather alert sounds again. Also, good idea to have the radio on instead of tunes from your phone or a CD for that reason. Good idea to have the radio on instead of tunes from your phone. My phone notifies me of this stuff. I was woken up by thunder directly above my house one night. It was a sound with such immense power that I have never experienced before. I've heard thunder, but usually from a distance. But this was directly above me and it was shattering, made me jump out of bed and gave me a cold sweat. My immediate thought was an explosion just went off. I understood after that why for so long people associated the weather with gods, because that was a sound of such sheer power that I definitely would have believed there was something immensely angry with us. Dave would definitely be getting sacrificed that night if this was more unenlightened times, that's for sure. 3 PM in Texas when suddenly black and green clouds roll in and it's as dark as night. I'm working retail as a manager and my cashier loved danger. I love storms, too, but it was clear this was a tornado. She kept dashing outside to watch, even when the hail started. To make things worse, suddenly a bunch of customers rush into our store. Turns out the local mall kicked everyone out and hundreds of people were looking for shelter in the surrounding stores. My cashier keeps trying to go outside to watch for the funnel the Weather Channel says is on the ground less than 2 miles away. Eventually I get everyone herded inside and I lock the doors. Within minutes the wind rips the open and is pelting the entrance with hail. I don't remember why we had rope, but we had rope. I think for a new sign that had yet to go up. So I had to go lash the doors together and stand there and hold the doors closed as well until the storm passed. I just remembered everything was so green. The clouds were green, the lightning was green tinged. We never did see the funnel, but suddenly it was over and the sun was out. Don't ever do that again. Tie the doors closed and then get away from them. In Joplin, Missouri tornado in 2011, the manager of the Pizza Hut did exactly what you did. The tornado sucked the door open and pulled him out. He died. Couple of years ago around Christmas, me and my sir were at his grandma's house with some storms going on around us. Well, we left when we saw a gap in the storms. We had to go through some back road, then we finally got on the highway. We had to pass over a long bridge over a lake. The sky was dark and scary looking but no big. Then there was a flash of lightning that lit up this huge mother of a tornado. For real, guys, like the last one in Twister. Luckily we were a couple of miles back, so we watched it cross the highway then booked it to my mother's house. I think about that all the time. If we had left his grandmother's house just minutes earlier we would have been caught in its path. This sounds like the tornado that hit Dallas the 26th of December. When I was in college I worked as a delivery driver for a Japanese restaurant about a 20-minute drive from campus. One day I was supposed to come to work. It was snowing like crazy. I decided to leave about an hour and a half before my shift because I knew it would be rough. I should have called in that it wasn't safe for me to go, but I was dumb and thought maybe I would get amazing tips if I was working. When I got on the small highway that took me there, I realized just how big of a mistake I made. I literally could not see anything in front of me, but I kept going and it was the most stressed I have ever been while driving. I finally understood the phrase white knuckle because my hands were gripping the wheel so tightly. I finally got there and was about to tune into the parking lot when I got a call from my boss. She tells me they're not sure if they need me, so to hold on for an hour. They always forgot that I didn't live in the same town and had to drive a bit to get there, so they thought I was still at home. I say whatever and decide to head to the Target nearby and spend an hour just walking around the store. Then I get a call from them saying that they weren't going to have a driver today and I shouldn't come in. I had to get back in my car and drive another hour and a half up in this really stressful weather, and I didn't even make any money that day. I've been through Hurricane Rita, Ike, and Harvey and grew up dealing with tornadoes. The scariest was a bad line of storms while my husband was working and I was alone in a 24-foot travel trailer with our newborn. The weather reported 3 tornadoes on the ground in our area and the sky was a sickly green. I grabbed the baby and hauled butt on foot to my mom's house, about 200 mi away. I got pelted by hail covering him. We get inside. I run to the interior and get into her heavy cast iron tub with a towel over my still sleeping son in case glass broke anywhere or debris hit. I was laying partly over him when the house started breathing. I heard trees snapping in the yard and the crack of the power line getting ripped down. When it was over, I went to check the camper, and since the yard was flooded from heavy rains that week, the tires floated. The camper was about 8 feet from its original spot and there were drag marks in the mud. Scared the heck out of me. It wasn't scary because of the weather itself. It was scary because I couldn't find my pet in some pretty horrible weather. I have a free-ranging bunny. Basically, he's huge. I felt bad keeping him in cages where he had so little space to move, so we let him run around the backyard. Anyway, it was storming and raining really hard one night and I was in the yard trying to get him inside. He was terrified, so he kept running behind the bushes and under the house in a little hole he had dug himself. Suddenly, I hear incredibly loud wind and I can't hear myself screaming for him or anything. I look behind me and there is a freaking tornado maybe half a mile away. I can't tell where it's going. All I care about is getting my bunny inside because now there's a tornado that could pick him up and take him away. I finally got him and ran inside and into the closet and everything was fine. He probably would have been pretty safe under the house where he was, but I couldn't leave him out there. That's a huge fear of mine. I love my cat and want him to be safe, but every time we're under severe weather he just knows to run from me. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.